Back here with our next edition of our tactics session, looking at next season and how all these new faces will line up their squad in the new Premier League season. We've already done Guardiola, you can check that out. We've already done Jose Mourinho from Manchester United. It's time to talk that Italian tactical genius, Antonio Conte. Will he go with this 3-5-2? I'm going to explain it right here. Let's talk some tactics. As you can see from this lineup, I have blanks everywhere, which is all well and good because I know you guys are not happy with Chelsea's season this year, so you might just go ahead and agree with me. So, in goals, Courtois, I'm sure will continue to remain #1 at Chelsea. At the back, the only two defenders I think would be able to cope with a 3-5-2, which I will talk about. I'm not sure if he is even going to try and play a 3-5-2. We know the manager that tried to do that the last time was LVG, and where did he end up? In the job centre. So, who knows if he's going to be able to go with that. But Zuma and Cahill are the only two centre-backs I think they can handle this at the moment. I've already talked about how Ivanovic is considered bearable, but far too easily beaten one-on-one, not quick enough to work into a 3-5-2. And then the midfield, Cuadrado. Interesting, because he might not even be there. I'm going to put him in at the moment because he fit in so well to Juventus' style of play, which Antonio Conte left and Allegri mastered at Juventus. And he adapted as well. He didn't always go with that 3-5-2. You see him change his formation up a little bit. But Cuadrado is the ideal candidate to fit into a wing-back position. He's got a great engine. He's got good technique in order to hold up the ball and find possession in small pockets of the park. And I think he's a player that Chelsea may need this season because after last season, there's a lot of damaged morale in there. There's a lot of people that were out of favour with Jose and even with Gus Hiddink. So don't be surprised if they bring someone like him back in after a successful season at Juventus. Left wing back, I know there's some youth there, some players that many Chelsea fans are fond of, but they're not good enough to cut it at the top level yet. I would not be surprised if Conte went in and tried to bring some familiar faces. Apparently, they're trying to bring Asamoah in from Juventus, a player that fit right into Conte's system there. Matic, I think, is going to have a great season with an Italian tactical genius, defensively minded manager coming in. I think Matic will only thrive. I think that he thrived in his first season with Jose Mourinho. This year, he got complacent, wandered far too high up the field, trying to make tackles that he didn't need to make. And I think that this season, he's going to get back to his best. Fabregas, again, another player that I would give a pass this year. I'm not going to not criticise Cesc Fabregas. I think he's got so much ability. But with Matic falling by the wayside, it automatically dragged Fabregas as well because those two were so dynamic in the middle together. And when one fell, both of them fell. They need another midfielder, though. They need someone in there, not Oscar. I think Oscar thrived again with Jose Mourinho, but he fell away. And he just doesn't have, I don't think, the tenacity to play in the Premier League week in, week out. I think in that middle of the park, you could use someone like a Dimitri Payet because I don't think you need just three hard-working midfielders, despite the fact that Conte has notoriously had that in his team. Pirlo, who obviously doesn't need to work hard because he's Pirlo, but Vidal, Marquisio, all these players are typical of an Antonio Conte team, but I think you'll want a little bit more quality higher up the park in there. And I think you'll see a rejuvenated Hazard, and you might see Costa there, you might not. I'm leaving him in there at the moment. But similar to the last couple of clips, we're going to throw up an example of one of Antonio Conte's best ever 3-5-2 teams. So let's take a look at Juventus when they went on that unbeaten season back in 10. So here's Antonio Conte's team from the 2014 season, just before he left and departed. But what a position he left Juventus in. They had the framework, which they eventually took forward and got to the Champions League final the next year, should I say. And at the back, they had Barzagli, Bonucci, Chiellini, still the starting three at the back for Juventus. They are very dominant in the Italian Serie A. And we have Lichtsteiner, a player that I'm going to highlight. I know you never thought this, Francis. Why are you going to highlight Lichtsteiner? You have Pogba, you have Vidal, you have all these quality players. Well, I'm going to highlight them because that's the typical type of player that Antonio Conte needs for his system to work. Asamoah as well in there, Pirlo, Vidal, Pogba. Often you'd see Marquisio come in there and fit in well to that team. Tevez and Llorente, which of course could have changed when they brought in Morata, Dybala, but a very similar system because he set the framework and they encompassed excellence in that framework. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is, would a 3-5-2 work in the Premier League? Yes, it would, but you have to be versatile. So before I get to my next image, talking about the triangles that he had going forward, one thing that Antonio Conte always stressed in this squad was the ability to adjust if you're playing against a team that has great width. Now, there's a lot of teams in the Premier League that will have natural width. Man City, if Chelsea come up with against Man City next year with a 3-5-2 against that Pep Guardiola 4-3-3, they could be in trouble. But if you have a player like Lichtsteiner, who I don't think Cuadrado is that player, but if you have it on the left-hand side, maybe you sign someone like a Cresswell who can bomb up and down the line and knows the Premier League inside out. What Antonio Conte's team had to do in terms like that is they had to adjust. And you'd often see this 3-5-2 slide and become a 4-2-4. Now, 4-2-4 was one of his first formations that he implied when he came to the world of football. He installed it in Bari, and they went on and won the Serie B. It didn't always work in Serie A, but he would often instigate it if they had to go and push for a goal or they had to adjust. So what you would see there is, in this example, it would be Lichtsteiner. Lichtsteiner's a defensive-minded wing-back, so it means he's always kind of worrying about this player, making sure to mark out wide. But when he supports, they all adjust, and they'll drag in someone like Asamoah. So it works in this horseshoe mechanism, which I always talk about, where one of the wing-backs will have to try and adjust, try and make up for a team that has great width. Now, Antonio Conte, in an interview, we were given an insight into the mind that is Antonio Conte's tactical genius, and he talked about, very simply put, in footballing terms, I like to attack with 5 and I like to defend with 5. He says he's not comfortable unless there's at least 5 players behind the ball. So that would always happen when you see Juventus going forward. Maybe if you had Lichtsteiner bombing up the line, you had someone like Asamoah tucking in, and it didn't always have to be Pirlo, but I'm talking about this adjustment. Vidal, who is a naturally hard-working player, as long as he was behind the ball, it would allow for Pirlo to pick up the ball in these pockets and then utilize 5 players in attack. Now, that's not saying that every time they attack, they would count the numbers in the final third and be like, oh, we've got 6 numbers up here, time to get back, Pirlo, don't join the attack. But just by a rule of thumb, Antonio Conte liked to at least have 5 men behind the ball, and if they didn't, they would have to adjust per his suggestions. So as long as this Chelsea team were able to add players to come in, like a Cresswell, who is one of the most sought-after fullbacks in the league, it's a very easy transition to push a fullback into an attacking wingback, like Ashley Cole did in his prime. He added so much more, I would say, depth to their attack when going forward, especially with those late runs. Someone like Cresswell could well and truly fit into this lineup, and he would tuck in, and it would make it a back 4, because if you have someone like Kurt Zouma, who's naturally athletic and strong, he can move into a kind of right-back role like this, and you can see this Chelsea team kind of move into a 4-2-4 with the likes of Cuadrado, Fabregas, Matic, and then you push someone like, whether it is a Paul Pogba higher up the park, and you move Hazard out wide, and you have a 4-2-4, or if you push someone like Cuadrado further up alongside Costa, Hazard, and Pogba, you suddenly transition into a 4-2-4. It's a very risky formation to start with. If I was a Chelsea fan, I'd be happy to see a 3-5-2 started off than a 4-2-4. I think with how many teams in the Premier League play a 4-2-3-1, to have 2 central midfielders up against at least 3 or 4 central playing midfielders and a striker dropping deep, you might get overrun in the middle of the park. I mean, that small Stamford Bridge park that seems to be just kind of like squashed into one area oftentimes in games when there's so many midfielders, I think that they would be overrun in the middle of the park. I think a 3-5-2, as I mentioned, with the lack of width at Stamford Bridge, I think they could get away with that. Or is it even that wide? I don't even know. Maybe it's just a camera angle at Stamford Bridge that makes it look so much more narrow. But the Chelsea teams of the past have always done a great job in their prime of snuffing out space. And I think a 3-5-2, as long as they're able to adjust as so, they could definitely make it work at home at least, and then maybe adjust going away from home. But going forward, very similar to most of the best tactical managers of today, they want to form triangles. So if you look at this image, this is from Juventus in one of their prime games. I think it was against Napoli. And if you see here, it's very similar to what we like to see with these triangles. So Bonucci naturally would drop deep to give an option to the likes of Barzagli and Chiellini with the 3 at the back. Pirlo would try and take the ball up, and it would often turn into a 3-1-4-2, where you'd see someone like Caceres. Look at that. He's naturally a defender. He can play centre-back, but he would often push forward and just give an option there as a white-right midfielder in a wing-back role. Vidal and Marquinhos would split the midfield so that it would allow for Pirlo to pick up the ball, and De Sigli as well, who would move out wide, but often take up a very similar role to that of Asamoah. These are defenders. These are not naturally wide players. You're not going to put Ribéry and Robben in these 2 positions. You're going to put someone like a Cresswell. You're going to put someone in there who can get up and down, but also has that final product. And up top, of course, you remember the hero that is and always will be Del Piero. So with that situation, you're going to see this Chelsea team look to try and get the ball into feet. Matic, as much as he's not as comfortable as he was, I would say, 2 seasons ago, I think Antonio Conte is going to ask a lot of him to at least try and form this position in the middle of the park to take the ball. So as much as Matic didn't have a great season last year, he is comfortable enough on the ball, and he's going to have to take that role and basically be one of the main leaders in this team at getting the ball into his feet the way Pirlo did. And now the Serie A is a lot slower than the Premier League, but that doesn't mean you can't find pockets of space. These are world-class players paid thousands and thousands of pounds, sorry. They should be expected to take the ball into feet. So what you're going to see is Matic and Fabregas may often resort to this kind of, I would say, more stagnant, flat midfield. If it happens that you want to get Fabregas in the ball in this area, you might see them go back to this flat 3 triangle in the midfield. But I think Antonio Conte is going to push, try and have Fabregas a little higher up because he's not the best defensively. Jose Mourinho did try to do this with Fabregas. And maybe sign a midfielder who's a little bit more defensive-minded but can get up and down, like a Marquisio, so that he can drop in and allow for Fabregas to pick up the ball in this area and work with Hazard. So there's plenty of things that you can expect to see from this Chelsea team, but it's all going to rely on the personnel. Each person in a 3-5-2 formation has such a hard-working job to try and stand by. You have to make sure that you're always getting behind the ball if you push forward. And if you do go forward on the right-hand side, you have to make sure that your left-hand side tucks in so that you're not susceptible to that counter-attack. It's a hard job, but if there's anyone that can master this 3-5-2 in the Premier League, I would say it's Antonio Conte. He did it so successfully at Juventus, and his record, similar to Pep Guardiola, speaks for itself. I mean, he's won 177 games in his career. He has drawn 87 and lost 58, so he's still got a unanimous winning record in his tenure. Went from the Serie B, as I mentioned, and played that 4-2-4, which was crazy at that time in Serie B with Bari. Got them into Serie A. Some shaky starts in there, but then he moved into Juventus, and it was all success from there. We'll see how he will do with Italy in the Euros this summer, but will he be a success at Chelsea? Do you think they need to bring in someone maybe like a Nainggolan from Roma to fill in that central midfield role alongside Fabregas? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. As always, subscribe to TYT Sports. It goes a long way. We are closing in on 300,000 subscribers, and if we get there, I'll do tactics every single day. That is a promise from our EP Dan.